London, 1814. The city glittered beneath the frost of early spring, every window of Mayfair glowing with candlelight and rumor. Coaches rattled past iron gates toward the Whitcombs' rented townhouse on Grosvenor Square, where that evening, society gathered to witness what many whispered would be the redemption of a fading name. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, eldest daughter of a once prominent line now wilting beneath debts, was to be announced as the future Duchess of Ashbourne. She stood before her mirror as the last pearl was clasped at her throat, her reflection composed, her heart anything but. The gown she wore, a pale lavender silk, shimmered faintly under candlelight. It had been her mother's. To Eleanor, it carried not pride, but memory, proof that elegance could outlive fortune, if only by sheer will. Her sister, Bella, drifted in behind her, the scent of rose powder following. 2 years younger and full of restless laughter, Bella wore a gown of cream satin trimmed in gold, her curls arranged with the easy grace of one born to be admired. "You look divine," she said, leaning against the door frame. "Every man tonight will envy the Duke." Eleanor smiled faintly, studying Bella's reflection beside her own, light beside shadow, radiance beside restraint. "It is not envy I seek," she replied quietly. "Only peace." Bella's eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them before she laughed again, soft and careless. "Peace is dull, dearest sister. Love is what makes the world whisper." When they entered the ballroom, all whispers indeed turned toward them. The chandeliers spilled golden light upon the polished floor, and the air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the sound of strings tuning for the next waltz. Lords and ladies, draped in jewels and expectation, glanced up as the herald's voice carried over the hum, "His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne." The music softened. Every head turned. The Duke stepped forward from the threshold, tall and dark against the sea of light. His uniform from the Peninsula campaigns had been exchanged for black evening tails, yet the aura of battle remained about him, an air of restraint, of a man accustomed to command rather than conversation. He bowed to the hostess, then to Eleanor, his gray eyes steady, unreadable. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice deep, softened by something like respect. "You look every bit the season's crown." It should have been a perfect moment, an evening sealed by formality and approval. Yet as Eleanor curtsied, she felt a strange stillness between them, as though a word unsaid hung in the air. She had known the Duke but a handful of weeks, through chaperoned visits and letters delivered by footmen. His words had always been measured, his glances fleeting. He was a man haunted by duty, not one easily given to affection. Still, she had admired his integrity, the quiet steadiness of his presence, the promise of safety in his gaze. That promise mattered in a world where her family's name teetered on the edge of ruin. But as they spoke beneath the chandeliers, Eleanor noticed the direction of his glance. Just beyond her shoulder, Bella stood surrounded by admirers, her laughter bright, her fan fluttering like a pale bird's wing. The Duke's gaze lingered for a moment too long before returning to Eleanor. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in a room built on perception, such subtleties carried weight. "I trust your sister enjoys London?" he asked, as though the question were harmless. "She does," Eleanor answered evenly. "Perhaps too much." The orchestra began the waltz. Custom dictated that the Duke should invite his intended first. Yet before Eleanor could offer her hand, another voice intruded, Bella's, warm and lilting. "Your Grace," she said, stepping forward with a half-curtsy, "I believe this melody was written for soldiers' return. Will you grant me the honor?" The crowd tittered, scandalized by her boldness. The Duke hesitated only a breath before bowing. "It would be my honor, Lady Bella." Eleanor's smile froze. Around her, fans snapped open like startled wings. The whispers began, low, hungry, merciless. She stood beneath the chandeliers, her pulse steady though her vision blurred at the edges. She had been trained from childhood never to betray emotion in public. To falter was to invite ruin. So she lifted her chin and watched them dance. The waltz moved like a tide through the ballroom, slow and intoxicating. The Duke's hand rested lightly at Bella's waist. Their figures turned beneath the glittering light as though the music had been written for them alone. Each revolution drew another murmur, another raised brow. Beside the refreshment table, Lady Pembroke whispered, "It seems the younger one dances for both their fortunes," her companion replied, "or perhaps she dances for her sister's title." Eleanor heard them but did not turn. She fixed her gaze upon the marble floor until the dance ended and applause scattered through the air like petals after a storm. When the Duke returned, he looked uncertain, almost contrite. "Forgive me, Lady Eleanor," he said softly. "Your sister insisted. It seemed impolite to decline." "Of course," she answered, her tone even. "Courtesy above all, Your Grace." Her words were measured, but the echo of them lingered with an edge she did not intend. He bowed, sensing the distance but unable to name it, and withdrew toward a circle of men near the fire. Bella approached a moment later, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with triumph and unease. "He dances well," she murmured, "and speaks little." "Then perhaps you have found his equal," Eleanor replied, and turned away before her voice could tremble. Outside, snow had begun to fall over the city. Through the tall windows, the flakes glowed white against the darkness, softening the sharp lines of London's grandeur. Eleanor stood apart from the laughter and music, watching the snow descend upon the lamplight. She felt the weight of her family's expectations pressing against her ribs, the marriage that would restore their name, the decorum she must never break. Yet in that quiet moment, she understood something she had not dared to name before, that love, once uncertain, could shift in silence, that admiration might wander like a restless wind. And in the delicate tremor of that realization, fear bloomed, not of scandal, but of loss without reason. As the final notes of the waltz faded, the Duke rejoined the room's center, speaking now with her father, his expression formal, his posture rigid. Bella hovered near him, her laughter gentler now, almost shy. Eleanor watched them both and felt the ballroom tilt around her, its golden light suddenly too bright. The evening drew to its end with polite applause, with promises of future dinners and visits, yet something irreparable had already begun to unravel. When the last carriage departed, the candles burned low, their smoke curling toward the painted ceiling like sighs. And in that quiet aftermath, as servants gathered forgotten gloves and empty glasses, Eleanor stood alone beneath the dying chandeliers, her reflection caught in the mirrored wall, elegant, unbroken, and profoundly changed. For she understood that before the season had truly begun, her story had already shifted from triumph to test, and the heart she was promised might already belong elsewhere. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of London's season beat on with unrelenting brilliance. The Whitcomb townhouse, once the quiet dwelling of two modest sisters, now echoed with carriage wheels and visiting cards, for the Duke of Ashbourne continued his calls with a punctual devotion that set society murmuring. Eleanor received him with the composure of a woman certain of her engagement, though no formal announcement had yet been made. Each visit seemed intended to confirm the promise unspoken, yet beneath the courtesies she sensed a change, subtle and cold as the air before rain. His words were fewer, his silences longer, and when he spoke of poetry or politics, his gaze drifted, always inevitably, toward Bella. Bella met that gaze with a blend of curiosity and restraint that made her seem almost innocent, though her laughter had softened into something more private since the night of the waltz. She spent more time in the garden, claiming she wished to sketch the tulips, yet her sketches were always of faces, and one of them bore a likeness that needed no name. Eleanor pretended not to see. Her heart clung to reason, to dignity, to every principle she had been raised to uphold. She told herself that rumors were bred by boredom, that affection once offered could not so easily be mislaid. But the city whispered otherwise. Invitations arrived for the Duke addressed only to the Miss Whitcombs, never to Eleanor alone. At supper tables and promenades, she caught fragments of talk, gentle, poisonous things spoken behind gloved hands. "The Duke's loyalty," one lady murmured, "is as changeable as the wind that carries it." One rainy afternoon, as the sisters prepared for a dinner at Almack's, Eleanor entered Bella's chamber unannounced. The room smelled of lilac water and fresh ink. On the writing desk lay a small stack of folded letters, tied with a pale ribbon. She hesitated, her conscience warring with her dread, then reached for the topmost one. The seal bore the Duke's crest. Her name was nowhere upon it. She broke it open with shaking hands. The words inside were tender, almost pleading, phrases she had once thought hers. "Your laughter is the only melody I crave in this world of formality. I am not myself in her presence. for you have made sincerity my undoing. Eleanor read them twice, the ink blurring as tears refused to fall. There was no anger at first, only disbelief, a hollow quietness that seemed to drain the air from the room. Bella entered moments later, a lace shawl around her shoulders, her color high from the evening's preparations. When she saw what Eleanor held, her breath caught. You should not have read that. Her voice was low, almost broken. Eleanor looked up slowly, her tone measured but trembling beneath its calm. Then I would have remained blind, as you wished. Bella turned away, her hands clasped tightly. I did not mean for this to happen, she whispered. He came to speak of you, yet he stayed to listen to me. It began with kindness, only words, and then— She stopped, unable to continue. And then deceit, Eleanor finished quietly. The silence between them was vast, filled with the echoes of every childhood secret they had shared. Do you love him? Eleanor asked at last. Bella's answer came like confession and curse at once. I cannot help it. Eleanor felt something inside her fracture, not violently, but with the soft inevitability of glass under strain. Then you must have him, she said. And the world will know what price you paid for love. She left the room without another word. That evening, London assembled under the gilded ceilings of Carlton House for the Prince Regent's masquerade, the grandest affair of the season. The air shimmered with candlelight and perfume, with the rustle of silks and the faint jangle of jewels. Eleanor arrived in an emerald gown heavy with gold embroidery, a deliberate choice, a statement of endurance, not vanity. Her mask, feathered in white, concealed the serenity she forced upon herself. Bella appeared soon after, cloaked in lavender satin and silver lace, her jeweled tiara glinting like frost under firelight. When the Duke entered, the music paused. His mask was simple, black and unadorned, but his presence commanded the room. All around, faces turned toward him, toward them. Eleanor stood beside the refreshment table, her gloved fingers tightening around a glass she did not drink from. Bella moved toward the Duke with hesitant steps, yet the hesitation dissolved the instant his hand found hers. The orchestra resumed, slow and measured, and they began to dance. Their movements were graceful, their expressions solemn. The room seemed to dim around them, as though even the chandeliers bent their light to witness. The narrator of gossip wasted no breath. How scandalous, someone murmured near Eleanor's shoulder. 2 sisters, 1 duke, and only 1 heart between them. She did not turn to see who had spoken. Her dignity, that fragile crown, demanded stillness. She watched until the dance ended, until the Duke bowed over Bella's hand with the reverence of a man long surrendered. When applause rose, it sounded like the sea breaking over her. Later, as the night stretched toward its end, Eleanor stood alone near the mirrored wall, her reflection multiplied into endless versions of composure. The Duke approached, his expression grave. Lady Eleanor, he said, I hope this evening has not caused you distress. She met his gaze without flinching. Distress, your grace, is a privilege of those who still possess hope. He hesitated, his brow furrowed. You must not believe the idle tongues of London. My regard for your family remains unchanged. Indeed, she replied, but your regard for its members seems increasingly selective. He looked as though struck, then bowed slightly. Forgive me, he murmured. I did not wish— You wished for what you chose, she interrupted softly. And now you must bear what follows. Before he could answer, she turned and walked away, her emerald skirts whispering across the marble like leaves in retreat. When she reached the carriage outside, the city rain had begun again, washing the gold from the cobblestones and turning the gaslights into trembling halos. Inside, she removed her mask and stared at it in her lap. The white feathers, once pristine, were bent and dampened by her grip. In the reflection of the carriage glass, her face appeared distant, the features of a woman who had learned the price of restraint too late. Behind her, laughter spilled from the palace doors, carrying Bella's voice, soft, uncertain, yet radiant. As the horses moved forward, Eleanor allowed herself a single breath of sorrow before composure settled over her like a veil. She knew that by morning, the news would spread through every drawing-room. The Duke of Ashbourne had chosen the younger sister. Yet even as betrayal tightened around her like cold silk, She felt something resolute awaken within. Love might be stolen, reputation might be ruined, but dignity, once guarded, could not be taken by any thief, not even one she had called sister. And as the carriage wheels turned through the darkened streets, Eleanor looked out upon the rain-slicked city and thought, with quiet certainty, that her story was not yet ended. The morning after the masquerade dawned pale and soundless, as though London itself recoiled from what it had witnessed. In the Whitcomb townhouse, the air hung heavy with silence. No rustle of servants, no clink of teacups, only the faint creak of old wood beneath sorrow's weight. Eleanor sat by the window in her night robe, her hair unpinned, her gaze fixed upon the grey horizon beyond Grosvenor Square. Outside, carriages passed like ghosts through the mist, bearing gossip to every breakfast table. Within hours, the city knew, the Duke of Ashbourne had formally withdrawn his suit to Lady Eleanor and sought the hand of her younger sister, Bella. When the letter arrived, a short, impeccable note sealed in black wax, Eleanor read it once, then again, each word cutting deeper by virtue of its politeness. Circumstances of the heart, unforeseen yet irrevocable, compel me to alter the course once promised. I beg forgiveness where none may be owed, and respect where love has faltered. It was a coward's apology, veiled in civility. She folded it neatly, set it beside her teacup, and sat motionless as the world outside continued without her. Bella entered timidly not long after, her gown of pale blue suggesting peace but her trembling hands betraying the lack of it. "He has written to you," she said, her voice unsteady. "He wishes to speak, to make things right." Eleanor did not look up. "There is no right in what has been done." Bella's eyes glistened. "I never sought to wound you. I tried to resist. Truly I did. But he loved you," Eleanor finished, her tone quiet but final. "Yes, I know. And you loved him. That is all that matters now." Bella sank to her knees beside the chair, her tears falling onto Eleanor's hand, but Eleanor did not withdraw it. For all her composure, something inside her softened at the sight of her sister's despair. Betrayal was bitter, but blood was older than any promise. "Do not weep," Eleanor murmured. "If this is the path you have chosen, then walk it with grace. Let it not be said that a Whitcomb sister quarreled over a man, even a duke." Bella looked up, her voice breaking. "You would still bless me?" Eleanor turned her gaze toward the pale light beyond the window. "No," she said. "But I will not curse you either." The days that followed moved with merciless precision. The Duke's engagement to Bella was announced in the Gazette, and the Whitcomb name once more filled the parlors of Mayfair, though for reasons far less noble. Society feasted upon the scandal. "Such tragedy," Lady Pembroke whispered over tea. The elder sister, jilted for the younger, it could be a play. To Eleanor, it was no play. It was a silence that consumed her. Yet she endured, appearing at dinners and drawing-rooms with serene composure, her smiles polite, her gowns immaculate. If London expected tears, it found instead the poise of marble. On a grey afternoon in Hyde Park, a carriage drew beside her during her solitary walk. The Duke descended, his hat in hand, his expression grave. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "I have wronged you." She regarded him coolly, though her pulse betrayed her calm. "Your Grace wronged only himself. I merely received the consequence." He hesitated. "I never meant to deceive you. My heart, it changed." "Hearts are fickle things," she replied. "That is why vows are made to bind them." He stepped closer, his tone imploring. "If you knew how I struggled, how your dignity shamed me even in my weakness, then you should have struggled harder," she interrupted. Her gaze did not waver. "You may marry my sister, but you will remember this. I would rather live unloved than loved dishonorably." For a moment, something like admiration flickered in his eyes, pain, too, but he bowed and returned to his carriage. The wheels rolled away through the slush, leaving Eleanor standing in the park stillness, her breath clouding in the winter air. She had not realized until that moment how much of herself she had reclaimed by refusing pity. The wedding came swiftly, attended by royalty, poets, and scandal-seekers alike. Carlton House glimmered with gold and glass. The orchestra played beneath chandeliers heavy with crystal. Bella, radiant in white satin and pearls, trembled as she walked the aisle. Eleanor stood among the guests, her emerald gown a deliberate echo of strength. When the vows were spoken, when Bella's voice wavered and the Duke's hand closed over hers, Eleanor felt an ache that was not pain but release, as though the wound, having bled long enough, had finally run dry. After the ceremony, amid congratulations and laughter, the Duke approached her once more. "You came," he said softly. "I did," she replied. "A Whitcomb keeps her word." He inclined his head. "Then I owe you more than I can express." She looked at him steadily. "You owe my sister happiness. That will suffice." Their eyes met for a final silent moment, his filled with regret, hers with composure, and then he turned away. That night, the celebration spilled into the gardens of Carlton House. The music softened, the laughter waned, and Eleanor wandered alone among the lanterns strung through the hedges. The air was cool, the scent of roses mingling with smoke and rain. From the ballroom, she could hear Bella's laughter mingling with the Duke's low voice, fragile, uncertain, like a melody played too soon after morning. She did not envy them. She pitied them both, for their joy was built upon guilt, and guilt is a poor foundation for peace. As she paused beside a marble fountain, an older gentleman approached, a distant cousin of the Duke's, known for his discretion. "Lady Eleanor," he said gently, "I wish to commend your courage. Few would have borne such humiliation with grace." She smiled faintly. "Grace, sir, is what remains when one has lost everything else." He nodded. "And yet, I suspect, you have lost less than you think." His words lingered as she lifted her gaze to the night sky. Above the garden's glow, the stars shimmered faintly, distant, unbending, eternal. In that stillness, she felt a quiet understanding take root. Love had betrayed her, but dignity had not. She had entered the season seeking a husband. She would leave it having found herself. When she returned home, the Whitcomb townhouse felt different, not emptier, but freer. The portraits on the walls seemed less judgmental, the ticking of the clock less severe. She placed the Duke's old letter in the fire and watched the wax melt, the ink curl into nothingness. The flames reflected in her eyes, not as destruction, but as renewal. As dawn approached once more, Eleanor sat at her writing desk and began a letter, not to the Duke, nor to Bella, but to herself. It spoke of forgiveness without forgetfulness, of sorrow without surrender. "Let them have their story," she wrote. "Mine begins anew." And when the first light touched the frost on the windows, Lady Eleanor Whitcomb rose, dressed, and stepped out into the waking city, no longer the woman who had been chosen and discarded, but one who had chosen herself at last. The carriages of London would carry her name still, whispered in tones of admiration and regret, but not pity. For among all who glittered in that fragile world of titles and tears, she alone had learned that love's loss could become a kind of freedom, and that dignity, once tempered by heartbreak, could shine brighter than any crown.